Hello.
No.
I've got to live up to that. What I thought I'd start off with is a little bit of a breakdown of the scope of the presentation. I'll give you an idea of how I break it down in terms of technology and more kind of management of the website. So can I just get a rough idea? How many people are actually hosting their own servers and running Drupal in-house? Okay. How many people are using a hosting company or it's shared? Okay. How many people have got a VPS, like a virtual? Okay, so it's a good mixture. The kind of steps you may take to resolve a breach could be different according to your setup. If you're on a shared hosting environment, you're kind of put in with a lot of other people, so you don't always have the same kind of luxuries and ways of resolving a breach. And we'll cover all of those and hopefully a little bit together. I'm trying to make it a mix of technology and more kind of management principles. I found that most security breaches, how you resolve them is more of a business process, and a very small part of it is the actual technical side. How you actually maintain policies in-house, how you do communications, that is often a lot more important than the actual technical side of resolving a breach. So it's about 20% technical, and the rest is probably a little bit more about workflow management. And I spell things with an S because I'm English, and I keep forgetting. So I thought I'd put a disclaimer at the front to show off any spelling mistakes later on. So about different types of issues that you can have with and pretty much any website, actually, not specifically Drupal. One of the most common ones is a technique called SQL injection. And this is a very simplistic view, but basically SQL injection is a way of putting information into your database through any part of your website which has the ability to interact with the database. It's people basically trying to pass information to your website in a fashion that you really don't want. So, and a good example of that is if, in the early days of development, we often do things like we may pass an ID number or a primary key value to a record on a URL to pull up a record in a database. So a good example would be, say if you have a press release table, and each press release has a number. It's very common on a lot of websites where they'll pass the record number to a page and then it retrieves that press release. SQL injection is really the process of adding additional information to that command line as a way of trying to put information into the system. So this is a very simplistic view. A good example is a form. So if you're doing a form in Drupal where you want to basically say look up a user, so if you insert the name Dave, basically you're inserting that information into your SQL statement in some fashion, and then you're trying to pull a record out. But the problem is, they may not enter Dave. We're making the assumption that people are going to do the right thing when they fill a form in. But as we all run websites, we all know that people do the strangest of things when it comes to filling in a form. So we want to be able to track for that. Another more simplistic view is one of my favourite. Anyone see that? It's a geek joke, so I'll find out how many people in the audience actually do SQL. Basically, I'll move on. Drupal is actually very good for protecting against SQL injection. If you come from a PHP environment, you're very familiar with the idea of building a SQL string and then executing that as a way of retrieving data from the database. Drupal has its own interface with commands like dbquery and db rewrite SQL. And basically what it does is Drupal has the ability to strip those inputs when they come in and remove anything that could be potentially harmful. So when you're writing your own code, the recommendation is really to use the built-in Drupal methods. If you take the normal approach on the PHP side where you construct the statement and then execute it, you have to take those extra steps yourself to basically strip out any potential malicious code that people can pass it. If you use the built-in Drupal, good to go. So that was SQL injection, very brief. We'll cover the next one, is cross-site scripting. And I've actually got a little demo. I can show you cross-site scripting. Cross-site scripting is kind of an interesting one, and it not necessarily exploits a feature of Drupal, but it can cause some problems with your Drupal site. When you put in your inputs, your comment fields, how many people here actually put their comment fields in Drupal as full HTML? Nobody? God, thank you. How many people use like filtered HTML? There we go. Text, plain text. Oh, that's good. All right. The reason I say that, there's no reason why I can't post code on a comment on an article. And there's no necessarily, it may not necessarily do a lot of damage initially, but if I log in as an admin user and I go into the comment queue and I retrieve that comment, it could issue a JavaScript statement against my website. And Drupal uses the menu system quite extensively. So your script could do quite a bit of damage. If you do a simple statement like redirecting to /logout, it's fairly harmless. But it could go in if you're an admin user and potentially go in and reset your password and then log you out of the system, which is not a good thing. So I'll actually give you a quick demo of that actually. I don't have a mouse at the moment. Basically, I put a very quick website up. And what I did here is it's a lovely little comment I want to post. Do you like that? Let's see what it does. I've actually made the mistake of leaving my comments as full HTML. Well, actually, out of habit, I'll reset it. But let's say I made the mistake and I put it in here. Slow. It's the organ grinder motion. Makes websites go faster. That's very slow actually. And that's running locally. Ah, there we go. In this case, it actually just does a simple JavaScript alert. It just pops the message XSS on screen. But the page, when it loads, is going to render the script inside that comment. So you really want to make sure that when you set your comments on your websites, that you actually set the comments to either straightforward plain or filtered HTML. Now Drupal out of the box always goes on the side of caution. So I had to go out of my way to change this to something more or less restrictive. It's always good when you do a demo and it works, even if it was a little bit slow. There you go. So in this case, I just got it to do a pop-up, but because of the nature of JavaScript, it could open Windows using Ajax. It may make Ajax calls to Drupal to actually use the menu system to do quite a lot of nasty things to your website. So one of the most important things is when you're doing comments, make sure you don't send them as full HTML. And some more examples. This link at the bottom is it's a treasure trove of examples that you can try. I'd be very cautious on some of them, because if you can't read the code and you're not sure what it does, you've got to take a little pinch of salt and you actually test it out. But that site's got some very scary examples, and it's actually a good idea to take a look, kind of get an idea of what people do when they try to break into your site. When you're writing your own code, well, we've kind of established that people can do funny things when they want to input data into your system. Drupal does actually have a series of functions built in which allow us to filter for those kind of behaviors. And there's a couple up at the top here with check plain, check markup. They basically just go in and if you take an input from a field, you may want to check it before you start to process it somewhere inside your PHP. And if you wrap it in something like check plain or check markup, it allows you to actually strip out a lot of the code and markup that's potentially malicious. Sometimes you do need some code. So if you use functions like the filter XSS or XSS admin, you can actually create a whitelist of markup. So if you want to say that you want your users to be able to do some HTML, but not all of it, you can actually break it down and split it out and say, you know, these are the tags I like to use. The other thing is, this is a bit of an Adobe trick, and it's a really simple thing, but it works everywhere in any web environment. I often refer to security as whack-a-mole. You know, you find a breach or a problem, and you stamp it out, and then something else comes up. Rather than trying to code for what you predict a hacker will try, it's better to code for what you expect the results to be. So if I'm looking at an integer being passed to my script, why don't I check if it's an integer? And anything outside of that, I just reject. And Adobe does that with Dreamweaver. If you use any of the built-in wizards in Dreamweaver, they automatically check for integers when you pass things like a primary key field. Protection. If you're writing any code, I said earlier actually to use these functions built into Drupal as a way of tracking it. Drupal has lots of methods built in which are really good at stripping out malicious code. If you use the Drupal method as well, if a new version comes out with an exploit and it gets patched in Drupal, you don't have to worry about retrofitting your code to kind of protect your website against that issue. Drupal does the job, you're leveraging Drupal's method. And never trust input from users. So, we're almost coming to the end of the techie thing. I can see some people flagging. Pizza only goes so far. So, permissions. It may seem fairly obvious with permissions if you work on a daily basis, but I thought it would be really good to just give a quick demonstration of how you change permissions, or the two commands you use quite extensively when you're building a website. There's the chmod command, change mode, and the chown command, which is change owner. And you often use this when you're putting your site together. If you ever wonder what the three numbers are, when you're using this command, they're actually broken down into the scope. So the first number on the chmod is the owner of the file, the middle one is the group, and the last one is the world ownership. If you're doing a website where Drupal files directory needs to be writable by the web server, then you often set the world option as writable. And with change ownership, you may make your settings PHP file owned by the web server, but you may want to change the ownership of the file to whoever the user is that the account right now. Social engineering. Has anyone ever heard of Kevin Mitnick? Yes. A couple of people. Does anyone know the quote when he was arrested in court, when the security consultant did the sting operation, they called him? He turned around to the judge and said, "Your kung fu is pretty good." He was then locked up for many years without trial after that. Kevin Mitnick was one of the most renowned hackers in I think pretty much all of it. He's been a very famous hacker. He attributes most of his ability to break into systems through social engineering, the ability to convince people to give you information. And it's surprising how easy it is to do. I've had to deal with hosting providers up and down the country for clients, and it's amazing how many hosting providers will give me access details if you sound confident enough on the phone to say, "Oh, I'm working with this company and I'm locking their website down and I like a little bit of information." And as long as you've got enough information to sound convincing, it's incredible how many people will actually turn around and give you information. So yeah, I think you really do need to be a little bit on the paranoid side when you deal with people. Don't always assume the best. And this works a lot with vendors. If you're working with a vendor, I don't give them full access to my servers. I might set up an account that they can use that has limited permissions, but I never give root access to a vendor who's only going to be on the site for 2 weeks. So always be very cautious of how you deal with people. He's actually written a book on social engineering, and he's now a security consultant. He's finally out of jail, but he is very, very good. He's quite an interesting channel. A couple of one-liners. We're almost coming to the end of the techie side. A couple of things you can do which are really simple, but can really make the difference when you're locking Drupal site down. And they're not actually Drupal they're not actually Drupal features, they're actually Linux server commands. When you mount the temp drive on your Linux server, put it on its own partition. And I would almost do the same with the files directory as well. And the reason you can do that is because of these two lovely little commands at the end. You can actually tell Linux to mount those drives non-executable. So if anyone downloads a file like a Perl script or even any kind of self-extracting file or any kind of shell script, it can set that drive as long as you want. It'll never execute. And usually when people try to drop things on your server, they do it through the process of a rootkit, which is basically they put something in a box that self-expands, like a self-extracting zip, But if you put those two options on the partition in the file system, nothing happens. It will just sit there as a plain file. The second one is a really simple one, and I have had immense fun with this one. How many people use wget? Go. Okay. Wget's got an option that you can send in a config file that tells it to trash the file after it's downloaded, so that when you run wget, it immediately deletes it. I had an issue about 10 years ago on a website, and while we were trying to figure out how they were getting into the system, we were watching the users downloading rootkits to our file system. The beauty was we'd set the bit to basically delete on download. So it was like watching bugs in a windshield. They'd drop the file, tried to run it, it's gone. Because the moment it downloaded, the system deleted it automatically. We often use wget as a way of running cron in Drupal. You don't need to have wget enabled to be able to download stuff on a production server. If you need to use it, and it's a very handy thing to have as a Linux admin, you can set up a local wget RC file on your own local account that you use, so that you don't have that restriction. But if anyone comes through on the website, it deletes the files automatically. Regular security scans. I've got some software installed on the server, on the laptop, and I thought I'd show you around them. I'll also point out a couple of other applications that are really good. You can't always be diligent on a very large website, so sometimes having tools and automated processes in place to make your life a lot easier. Limit who has access to your code base. I dealt with clients recently where in the past, when they had security issues, the people in charge of the website were not very savvy as far as the technology, and they were handing out the root password on the server to every vendor. We went back and found issues dating back 5 years on the website. So never give people more access than they need. If anything, be a bit more restrictive. Code for what you expect. That goes back to the idea of, rather than trying to predict what a hacker will do and code against it, it's better to actually code for what you expect the result to be. It's a lot less work, but then it usually covers a multitude of sins. Web application firewalls. Does anyone use the web application firewall? Tried. Which one was it?
Tried setting up cloud security.
Okay. Oh, okay. I know for Apache.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, a web application firewall is a piece of software that runs either on the server or in between the server and your website that scans the website on a regular basis, looking for vulnerabilities. And I'll give you a list of a couple that are worth looking at. There are a number out there. There's two I'll actually pull out as a highlight. White Hat security. I've had a lot of active use of White Hat software. It's a really good application. It's a third-party service. What it does is it has access to your code repository, and it often fits inside your development process. So before your code is deployed to your web server, it gets scanned and audited by the web application firewall. It can then prevent the code from being deployed if there's a security issue with the source code. The only thing that I find with these is they tend to have a bit of a learning curve in terms of teaching the software. They're very simple to use, but as you start to run them, you tend to find false positives. Often the server will say, this is a disastrous issue, people are going to run away with all your data, and you look at it and go, no, that's fine. So you will get the odd false positive, but they learn. So as you start to go through them, the software will then hit less and less. It's a paid service, White Hat Security. Naxi is an open source one, and that one is, I haven't actually had much experience with it, but I'm starting to see some really good buzz in the out in the net for as an open source tool. So that's definitely something to look at. I've added a new one to the list. This one in this afternoon actually. ClamAV. ClamAV is an antivirus program that runs on a Linux server. Media Current was working on a project recently, and we had an old code base from a previous developer, and it flagged with one of our developers that there was a Trojan on their website, and it's basically uploaded many years ago, and we found it because our antivirus determined it was a Trojan virus. It was an embedded link to a remote JavaScript. So adding an antivirus script to your server is actually quite handy, and it's something that we probably recommend moving forward. Cloud AV will quarantine any files that it regards as a Trojan, and you can script it. So if you want to say every night or every once a week, scan my website, if any files did make it through the wonderful security we're going to put in place, Cloud AV can actually extract it, push it into a quarantined area, and send you an email. And it's open source and free. So I really would say take a look at that as well. For command line warriors, 3 commands which I end up using day in, day out. LSOF is probably one that most people are not familiar with. LSOF shows you which files are opened by a port or a service or a user. And you can often set it in an interactive mode to say, show me everybody who's currently looking at the website. So if you're on a box that's being actively panned and you're trying to figure out what they're doing, sometimes seeing where they're coming from is a good idea. You see what pages they're calling. So you'll actually see live traffic. If you look through your logs or any kind of stat program, it's a bit stale. If you look at some of the web stats, it can potentially be hours old. LSOF will show you exactly what's happening in real time. grep is a wonderful one. If you find issues with a breach, you can often use grep to search through all the files to find every file that user may have touched. It's a very handy one. And find is, well, it's fine. If you find a piece of code, it's a great way of, again, searching for files. If you discover a Perl script that was uploaded accidentally, then you can use that to search the file system to find other occurrences. Target teams. I love this phrase. Microsoft has their own phrase for target teams. And the whole concept of a target team is really that it is much better to be ready than it is to get ready. Target teams originally came out from the aeronautics industry. Microsoft refers to them as a core computer security incident response team. And I never remembered that, so I always call them target teams. Everywhere I've worked, we call them that. Target team is basically members of staff in your company that is activated or becomes responsible to handle any security issues related to your website. They're not necessarily technical people. In fact, most of the time they're not. The kind of people that you want to get involved is your IT department, your website tech lead, whoever the webmaster is or whoever's in charge of the project, any management stakeholders. When you end up with an issue where a website gets broken into, your execs and your managers are under a lot of pressure. So it's always good to have at least one person who's highlighted as being a member of the team that's the information source, because it keeps them off your back while you're trying to figure out what happened to the system. And your legal department, for obvious reasons. Unfortunately, there's a lot of points, and I'll go through them. The slides will be made available. What do they do? When you get a breach, I found that most of the problems in responding to that is this kind of headless chicken syndrome. Nobody knows who's in charge, who's dealing with it, who's calling who. If it happens out of hours, they don't know the phone numbers for all their team members. So basically, the first thing you want to do is make sure that every member of the team has access to all the contact information for every member of the team. You also have a dedicated workflow. You have one person who's in the lead. If that person can't be got hold of, then you have the next one in the team, and the next one, you have a clear chain of command. Set up an email for the team. One of the reasons it's worth having an email that you may not use unless you have an issue is that you can CC any emails relating to the issue to that team member or that email address. So after the dust settles, if you need to then compile all the email related to the issues for legal purposes, you can retrieve all the email from that email address and you'll have everything that's related to that matter. You need a secure area in the network to store any kind of forensic information. You may have secure information that only wants to be made available to the team. There's also a little bit of fear, uncertainty, and doubt if you're on a large organization and your website's been breached. So it's often a good idea to set up a place on your intranet, either a secure Drupal site that contains any information where you can upload all the different information that is related to the case. And make sure each member of the team has got access to it. During the course of a breach, it's good to have a sit-down meeting every morning, even for 5 minutes, just so that every member of the team knows what's going on. Communication is really key for anything like this. The amount of times I've come into a company where the management team is very concerned and they really want to be involved with it, and they end up impeding progress on resolving the issue. If everybody's aware of the situation every day and they know what every member of the team's doing, that issue goes away. So, clear line communication. Establish a communication plan. This is where your marketing and your legal team will come in. A lot of times you may have a breach which could have customers very concerned about your business. So having a press release ready to go prior to an issue is a good idea. You pray that you never use it, but again, it's better to be ready than it is to get ready. If you have a press release and a communication plan in place, if something happens, it's ready to drop if you need it. It's also good to have an internal communication plan too. I've worked at one company where we had reporters ringing out any number they could get on the desk to try and find out what was going on in the system. And the last thing you want to do is potentially have someone who's got no idea and they want to give their opinion of what's going on. So sometimes it's a good idea that you put together a communication plan internally, and most of the time it tends to be, let me redirect you to the marketing or the legal department, so they can then deal with it. But you want to make sure that people know that that's what they do if they have an issue. Team members keep their own departments apprised, so that keeps communication going, but it also prevents kind of bottlenecks as well. The other thing that the team should do as preparation for an issue is you should always have a corporate communication plan. As I just said about putting a press release together, just having your marketing department or your corporate communications team actually have a workflow together is, I think, personally very, very essential. Your IT department or your web team, they should also have an incident response worksheet. They should have at least the kind of steps that they need to do. A lot of times during the process of investigation, they can destroy evidence. So maybe it's good to have a workflow or a worksheet that they can go and they can. There's no downtime. You know, if an issue happens, pull the worksheet out. Everyone knows what they have to do, and they get on with it. Have a clear list of people internally who are stakeholders of the website, and make sure they're kept in the loop at all times. It's a good idea sometimes to have a single point of contact for any inquiries. So if anybody calls in anyone in the company, they always know who to call if there's an issue. And make sure that everybody has contact numbers for everybody on the team. And I'll put the quote in because I'm a Blackadder fan, and I thought it was appropriate. So far what we looked at. We want to sanitize our input. We want to make sure that you use the built-in Drupal methods. They are very secure and they get updated on a regular basis. Keep your site up to date as much as possible. Don't just put modules up and not update them. It's a good idea to keep those up to date at all times. Have a plan in place. Regularly audit your code. And this is just a one-off. Never ever hack Drupal core. Drupal, was it Dries actually said? Every time you hack Drupal core, somebody kills a kid.
Oh, yeah.
I think you did. Yeah. So never mess with code. What to do when a breach happens? That's pretty much the look on everyone's face when they realise that their website's been hacked. So what you do is, first off, don't panic, and then release your targeting. I love that picture. You want to activate your team. I always start the clock because if you pull in legal, they want to know time and date on every action you do. If you have data that's compromised that results in you pulling in the FBI or even the Secret Service, they want a timed breakdown of every step that you do. And it's the kind of thing that most people don't think to do when they get a breach. They always end up doing it afterwards and we all forget. So at the first instance, start the clock. If you have the box and it's a major issue that's with a compromised website, don't shut it down. Pull the plug. Can anyone think why you do that?
Memory resident.
Yeah, if it's resident in memory, if anything's been loaded on your box, it may run the moment you shut it down. Most Unix web servers run through initialization levels. There could be a script designed in there that when you start to shut the box down, it goes in and either removes evidence of itself or does more damage. So it's actually better to pull the plug. I would normally redirect the site to a static page, preferably not by putting an HTML page on the box that's in question, but maybe through DNS redirected to a static HTML page somewhere else, just so that your customers know the site's being worked on. Take a copy of all the data, store it offline. I've done it before. I've actually recorded data to a DVD, because then you don't accidentally overwrite some of the data that's on the DVD. A lot of times, the forensic evidence can be destroyed by well-meaning admins going in there trying to fix it. So before you do anything, it's worth taking a copy of the data on your system and burn it off to a read-only medium. That way, things like file creation dates are then preserved. So if you then want to find out the extent of the breach, you've got data that's clean and has been modified by If the breach is of a nature and your data's been compromised that involve you to get the authorities involved, it's worth getting them on board immediately when you have an issue. Does anyone know how long you're legally required to not contact the authorities when you, or contact your customers when a breach has occurred? I had to research this myself. I don't think anybody really knew. Basically, the way it works is it's purely arbitrary. It's between you and the legal departments that you pull in. If there's a chance that the investigation could be compromised by you releasing a press release to your customers saying that the data's been compromised, it's very possible that the authorities will turn around and say you have to hold on. If the nature of the data is relating to things like home numbers and addresses and credit card information, you're often required to actually report it within 24 to 48 hours to your customers. Using a backup, a lot of the times we don't always know what the cause of the issue was. So sometimes going in there and just pulling it back up and putting it back up there means we could be putting the breach back up on the web server again. So we may restore the web server and then it could be down again 10 minutes later. So we really need to investigate the cause before we start to figure out how to actually resolve it. Don't try and change password or fixes until you either call the authorities or at least taken a backup copy. A lot of the times you end up destroying information. If a file's been compromised, it has a file creation date. Going back to that find command earlier on, I may search all files that have been modified by that date, and that might give me a good idea as to what the extent of the damage done on the box. So it's best to take a backup first, not to change systems, take the box offline, take a read-only copy, and then start to investigate. Personally, if the file system on the operating system, on the server itself has been compromised, I never trust the box again. I would rather flatten the box from a clean install, patch it, and then use that for the basis for the website again. We don't always have that luxury. If you've got the website stored on a server with multiple websites from other clients on a shared environment, you don't always have that luxury. On Windows environments, in the past, I've always flattened the box. Because if DLL gets compromised, you're not going to know. You can put your website back up there again, and it's still got the vulnerability, it's still there. Same with Linux. If you've got anything in there, it's better to not trust the box. And I always investigate in parallel with the authorities. But follow your workflow and communication plan. When do you get your website back up again? Or what should you do to get it back up? First thing, I want to know how it happened. A lot of the time, there is no hard and fast rule. Every breach can be different. So your technical team, when they start to investigate it, you want to identify the scope of the damage and how they got into the system. And then once you've done that, you've then got at least a place to then work from to actually start to close those breach points and then start opening your site for business again. Don't just change passwords and put it back out there, because if somebody got in and changed your password in the first place, changing your password is probably not going to fix the issue. They're probably going to come back in again and reset your password. And I have seen that. I've seen sites where they kept resetting the admin password again and again and again, and the user just kept coming and going, I keep changing the password, they keep going in. So you really need to know where your breach point is before you start to put your website back out there again. Getting running again, even if you're a single web developer just working at home, it's worth looking at revision control. Using a system like Subversion or Git is really, really handy, mainly so you can see when files have changed. A lot of times deployment shops don't normally deploy straight from something like Subversion to a web server. it's actually a really good idea to do, because then if the website does get breached, you can do a comparison and say, well, I knew it was working yesterday and got breached today. What's the scope or the extent of the damage? So using Subversion, you can easily compare it to the way it was in the past, and then that way makes it much easier to identify the source of the problem. You're obviously going to restore from backups or from your Subversion or Git repository, but again, only start to look at that as an option once you've identified the cause and that you've actually closed the breach off. Then you change passwords. Once you've figured out how it's done, and that does take a bit of investigation, so it can be different on every single breach. Work with your hosting provider, IT department, or WebGeek, whoever manages your site. If you're running a server in a hosting facility, they often have an abuse department, or if they've got a provider like Verizon or Sprint who actually provides the lines, they usually have dedicated abuse staff as well, who will be able to actually help you. So if you're really concerned, speak to your hosting provider. We work with a lot of different hosting companies. Some of them, like Server Beach, they actually provide services where they will scan your server for you, and they manage any kind of breaches as well. So, yeah, I'm going to do resource. I'm actually going to show you some demos of some software. I'll try and keep it very quick, and then we'll get to some questions. Some really good resources. Well, Drupal is one of the best places to go. There's a dedicated security group up there. Regular security advisories. If, again, going to every day is going to be a bit tiresome. We've got 150 websites you visit every day. So there's RSS feeds, and you can also sign up on mailing list as well. Drupal core tends to be very secure. Most modules are fairly well written if they adhere to Drupal standards, but there's breaches happen all the time. A lot of security issues get found all the time. So it's always good to hear about them as they're discovered. If you use a tool like Drush and you check on a regular basis, that can show you when there are security updates available for your website as well. But that's a very good one with security advisories. They have sections on running secure code. I've actually linked a Microsoft Technic article, and anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge Linux geek. But it was a very good article, so I thought it was worth putting it up there. Microsoft has a really good history on setting up time teams, or their CCSIRT teams. So they have a lot of documentation that can be adapted for an Apache system. The slides are available. These are actually more up-to-date slides, so I'll be updating those and putting them out. And the other one is the Secret Service have an office here in Atlanta, and they actually have a department doing cybersecurity. They are tremendous fun to email. They actually put their badges in their emails, which I love. I mean, I'm from England. We don't have kind of sheriff's badges in England. So when you get an email with a sheriff's badge in, a lot of kids don't understand. But they do have a department here in Atlanta, and they're actually pretty good. They'll work with your Tiger team, and they get involved very, very quickly. They're also very good at helping you get started on the process too. So I thought we'd take some questions, and then maybe I'll show you some, just a quick demo, a couple of bits and pieces. So that's me when people ask me questions. Do you have any questions? No?
You didn't bring up the subject of maybe encryption and how that could help.
Well, things like SSL for forms. Or just
but also, I wonder where, let's say, users or clients may want to register, and I've noticed with a number of websites, they'll send you your password in an email.
Right.
You open up your email, you click, and then of course you can reset your password or whatever. I'm sure there are hackers who can try to emulate that.
Yeah, well, you could potentially do a phishing site. If they get into cross-site scripting is probably the worst offender for that, because what they can end up doing is actually the script itself doesn't do anything. It's only when an administrator opens it that it could basically kick off the process. And you could rewrite part of the email so that the response gets sent somewhere else, but you could have it sent to a fake phishing site. So instead of coming back to your site, it comes back to a fake front end. We saw one very recently actually where they actually emulated a cPanel login. So they actually sent you back to the cPanel login, and of course, the moment you enter that information, it's all over. They've got full access to your server. So there's not a great deal you can really do about that with cross-site scripting. In terms of SSL, if you're talking about encrypting forms, there is actually a secure pages module that's pretty good. It allows you to identify Drupal paths and nodes that are then handled by HTTPS. It works very well. It's very easy to manage. The only downside I found is if you've got a web server in a web cluster environment, so you've got a load balancer and 2 web servers or 3 or 4, it can often have problems, in which case I'd probably look at using an Apache rewrite or with mod rewrite. So that's probably the best we can do now.
What do you think is the best way to do backups if you want to keep them on a local machine and not on the server, if they're large?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways you do it. There's the backup and migrate module. It's very useful for taking up to the database. The advantage on that is often cache tables on big websites get pretty big, so you often don't want to dump those out as part of your backups. So you can schedule a backup and migrate to take a snapshot of the database. Even using the native MySQL dump command is very good. You can tell it to exclude certain tables. And then there's a command called auto MySQL backup, which allows you to schedule regular backups to the database, and then you can call those locally. If you want to back up the website files, if they're in a repository like Subversion or Git, then you've also got the latest update from the actual files, the actual Drupal site, but that doesn't cover your files directory. And covering the files directory is usually not a good idea in Subversion, because so many temp files get written there, so you end up with these massive repositories, which really upset administrators. So I would probably use Subversion or Git to maintain the actual website core. To get the databases, I usually prefer using auto MySQL backup or MySQL dump. But backup migrate works really well, and it also works with Drush as well, so you can all make that.
And you don't have a problem with a MySQL dump as far as size?
Well, you can actually specify which files to ignore, which tables to ignore. Cache tables get very big. If you've got a large website, cache tables can get incredibly huge. Also, if you've got search running on the same box, those search tables can get insanely large. So it's often better to say that that's the kind of data that can be built, or it can be run through rebuilding the cache or rebuilding the search index. So I normally don't dump that down as part of my backup. I usually just pull the core of the system down and then run it locally. If you use a Mac or a Linux system, you can use tools like rsync, and then just set up automated syncing of file directories between servers. That's quite handy too.
rsync?
rsync. rsync allows you to set up 2 locations and keep them synced up. And it works across SSH as well. So, the other thing to watch out for that is if you've got a hosting facility like Rackspace, if you're doing that on a public IP address, you're going to get charged bandwidth. So you do backups, and then you get this bill for $2 grand at the end of the month, so, which I've seen. So be very cautious on that.
What about locking down security, locking down processes like SSH and putting those on different ports? Is that a good
I actually think that's very high. It's really unusual how when you're doing Drupal security, I often say that a lot of it needs to be done on the operating system. I usually do some simple things like just changing the port number that SSH is on. As much as that's not really high-level security, a lot of scripts that people run to look for SSH running on a server will often flag that SSH is running on port 22. So shifting it to another port number is a good idea. Using certificate-based authentication is quite another good way to go. Disable any services not needed. If you're using SSH, you don't need FTP. FTP is terrible. Please never use FTP or Telnet. They transmit data in plain text, including your password. So use SSH, use SFTP, and disable any services that use things like FTP and Telnet. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Got a demo? Got some stuff to look at. Couple of tools. Now you can probably tell I'm actually using Linux as my desktop. These tools, a couple of them are available for Windows and for Mac. There are a lot of Linux-based security tools, and a lot of times these are actually, you can run it in a virtual machine. So if you use something like VMware or VirtualBox, you can actually download a pre-built Ubuntu image and actually just run it in a window. So it's often handy to have if you want to run system tests. First one I'm showing you is a tool called RATS. I can't remember what it stands for. It's something like, I don't remember, to be honest. But RATS is a rather handy little tool. It searches source code for common security issues. And it can be scripted because it's a command line tool. So it does things like Perl, Python, PHP, and I think it even does Visual Basic as well, but I'm not sure on that. I actually downloaded Tiger CRM as an example. I ran this against Drupal earlier today, and Drupal core always comes up clean. And it took me a while to find one that came up with a couple of issues. Now with RATS, I can actually tell it that this is actually a PHP search I'm looking for. Search all PHP files and tell it the level of verbosity that I want it to search. And then when you run it, it's very quick. You can see how many lines of code. That's just analysed 4,000 lines of code, and it's identified 3 different issues out of PHP level. So this is a really handy one if you write your own modules. Just to run it through a tool like RATS beforehand. It's very quick, it's very easy. It gives you the line number, and it usually gives you an advisory to tell you what the issue is this one. It's very good as part of an audit. If you're an IT department, there's a wonderful tool called OpenVAS. OpenVAS comes in 2 parts. It's a server and a client. It's open source, and it's very actively maintained. And it's a very cool tool. What it does is it runs as a server, which can be run on pretty much almost any environment, and then you create clients that talk to it. So with my laptop at the moment, I've got it running as a server. It's downloaded something like 100 and something odd plugins, 12,000 plugins. The different breaches, security issues, you name it, it's pulled them down. The software checks every time it starts up on the server to see if there are new plugins to download.
Is this comparable to Coverity?
Very similar, actually. And the thing I like about the open source versions is they tend to be more active on their patches and plugins. So, and there's a lot of these kind of web application firewall stroke security scanners, but I do like it. Well, I'm very open source oriented anyway, but I do tend to find that they actively patch their
Because I'd worked at companies where we'd gotten licenses for Coverity, and I've always said we need to find something that's cheaper.
Well, that's free.
That's incredibly cheap and looks functional too.
Yeah, and it's very good. I have some tremendous luck with that. As you can probably see from here on the right, it actually breaks the vulnerabilities down by multiple categories, and I've actually highlighted here the Drupal issues. It does searches for things like HTML injection or cross-site scripting. It also looks for older versions of Drupal, but it's not just limited to Drupal. It's got .NET Nuke, it's WordPress, Joomla, you name it, they're all in there. It also breaks it down by server as well. So if I can get it to the top. So you can see here the different types of servers. Cisco, CentOS, Ubuntu, Debian. They're all in there. And you can set up different types of profiles as well. So if I'm testing against a Windows server, I can just limit the issues to just Windows vulnerabilities. Or I can tell it to use Linux. It creates a report for each scan that you run. And because the client runs independent of the server, you can actually script the server to run on a regular basis. So you could have the server do scheduled scans every night. And when you connect the client, it downloads the reports to the client. Well, I ran this particular issue. If I go to reports, some of the information it gives you. A lot of these tend to be false positives. I do like it when you first run it, it says things like, you're running PHP MyAdmin. How many people use PHP MyAdmin? Most of us do. Well, it sits there and goes, well, that had the potential to change the database. Yeah, I know. So that's something I'm not really fussed about. So what you can do is,
does it suggest setting up sessions for PHP MyAdmin?
what it tends to do is it will look at PHP MyAdmin and see if it's incorrectly set up. And if there are any security issues on it, it will actually flag it and tell you what you need to do to lock it down. In the different issues I've got in here, it says, okay, you're running MySQL. So it's really, and you can see it says risk factor none, but I don't really need to see that anymore. So I can actually go in there and say, well, actually, this is actually a false positive. Okay, it just told me I've just been dissed by software. So you can go in and actually look through all your different options, and you can actually fine-tune them down, and over time it becomes very detailed. You end up with very good it's a very useful tool. So anyone got anything else? Or?
Demonstrate how you're running it automatically, just like when you said you had the script in set to run automatically on your code base, right?
Sorry,
This
there's a Mac client. If you go to the OpenVAN site, they have clients for all major platforms. The server tends to run on a Linux system or a Unix system, but I think you can get it running on other platforms as well.
I'm not worried about other platforms besides Unix, like.
I've not really tried it really,
but you could set that up like a cron and just run it on a code base.
Yes, you can. With the rules and the testing you want to do, you can actually write scripts to basically say, I want you to test the following website. You can even provide them with credentials as well. So if we look under options, you can actually go in and, this is a base install, but you can actually go in and set up things like, here's a Windows share login, and it can then try and mount the shares automatically and then scan those as well. So you can actually go into quite detailed scans. And over time, as you build them up, it just becomes more and more useful as data goes by. But when you run it on the server, you can then call it from a command line, which means we can put it into a cron, and then that way we can just connect on the client and see the results. And it's very useful seeing them over time. So you can see on the local website, it puts a timestamp, and it ran the one this morning. It shows me there were 7 issues flagged as medium, which tends to be information, and then low ones are the ones where they say, hey, you're running MySQL, so, which are not a problem. That's it.
Cool.